Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar on child and youth homelessness and the American Rescue Plan Act. So just a little bit about your presenters today. My name is Alleanne Anderson, and I am the Policy and Outreach Associate for Schoolhouse Connection, and I'll leave my colleagues introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. I'm Barbara Duffield. I'm the Executive Director of Schoolhouse Connection.
And my name is Darla Bardine, and I'm the Executive Director of the National Network for Youth.
Okay, so just to get through a little bit of housekeeping, if you have any questions at any point in time throughout the webinar, please use our questions pane, which will be to the right side of your screen. We're going to have an archive of this webinar and all of the materials posted on our website. It's hyperlinked here, and you'll be able to access it through the Schoolhouse Connection website. And then you'll also be able to access the PowerPoint as well as bill summaries from both Schoolhouse and the National Network for Youth in your handouts panel, which is in close by to where the questions pane is. And then we also have another hyperlink here on this slide for both bill summaries. But just to kind of go through what we're going to cover today, we're going to go through the education and early childhood segments of the American Rescue Plan Act, tax credits, stimulus payments, early childhood and resources, food and nutrition support, homeless assistance and housing funds, youth suicide prevention, and what's next for Congress. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Barbara.
Thank you, Alleanne. So, as Alleanne mentioned, you have bill summaries both from Schoolhouse Connection and the National Network for Youth, and we know there are many summaries out there, and it can be good to kind of pull them together. So we don't want to spend our time with you today just reading things to you that you can read in the bill summary, but really want to help think through the various pieces of this package, how you can help the youth and families and children that you're working with access all of this. So even if you're in K-12, to think about the early piece, or about the higher ed piece, or if you're in youth services, to think about the K-12 piece, and look at this as sort of many different supports from different systems. And we want to think proactively, how can we help our youth and families access resources? What are some of the questions that we don't know yet, but we can shape as these programs are being rolled out? So questions about implementation, and then resources to get ahead of the planning. So even though there may be a number of questions that we can't answer yet, to get ahead of thinking about how to pull things together and what, if you would be a recipient, what you would use the funds for. So again, we're thinking about this webinar less so just telling you what's in the bill and more ideas for how you can pull together. And we want your thoughts too as we go through this, for where we as advocates are helping, working with agencies to help shape implementation. So with that, for our organizations, the highlight of this legislation really was an amendment by Senators Murkowski and Manchin on Saturday morning for a dedicated $800 million to identify children and youth who are experiencing homelessness, provide them with wraparound services in light of COVID-19, and also with assistance to attend and participate fully in school. This $800 million comes right off the top of the $122.5 billion for K-12 education. So it's off the top of the overall amount for K-12 education. And we'll talk a little bit more about it in the next couple of slides. But again, just wanted to note that this is sort of separate from the ESSERS funding, or ESSERS 3. We're not sure what the big K-12 funds will ultimately be called, but it's separate from that. Of the remaining $121 billion, 90% needs to go out to local educational agencies. There are a couple other pieces, though, that are really important, particularly with respect to students experiencing homelessness. At the state education level, there are 3 required set-asides. 5% of the total is for learning loss and activities to address learning loss. Summer program, 1% for summer programs and 1% for after-school programs. In each of those 3 reservations, students experiencing homelessness are explicitly named, as well as students in foster care, migrant students, students with disabilities, and other marginalized student groups. And in all 3 of those reservations, the law says to address the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on these populations. So that's an important piece to note. And similarly, for local school districts, there's a 20% set aside, required set aside for learning loss and related activities that also mentions populations who have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19 and specifically mentions homeless students. Next slide, please. So on top of that, a couple other pieces on K-12. First, there's a requirement if a school district doesn't already have a plan for reopening, it has to develop and make publicly available a plan for reopening within 30 days of receiving funds and also offer a public comment period. So we want to note that because this is going to be a really important opportunity to work with school districts to make sure that there's very thoughtful inclusion of McKinney-Vento students to ensure that they're prioritized and accommodated in school reopening. Additionally, there's a study on learning loss that also specifically mentions homelessness. And then in addition to all of the previous education funds, there's specific funding for special education students. And again, we know many of our students experiencing homelessness also have special education needs. Next slide, please. So that's what we know. There's much that we don't know. So here are the pieces we're getting a lot of questions about what has not yet been determined. Unlike previous disaster bills, this wasn't just like a line item from McKinney-Vento. It's a budget bill, which is very wonky. So it comes from K-12 education funds, but there's some pieces that have yet to be determined that the Department of Education will be determining. The formula for how does the money flow from the Federal Department of Education to state education agencies. We think it's likely to look something like McKinney-Vento, or it's according to the state share of Title I Part A, but that's not been decided. How will the funding go from the state to local communities? And that's another piece that the department will determine. Partnerships with community organizations. We've heard a lot from many different liaison state coordinators that it would be great to partner with community organizations for some of the wraparound services, whether through grants or contracts. So that's yet to be determined. You know, we have a phrase in this law that doesn't appear in McKinney-Vento, and that's wraparound services. So that implies that it's something broader than and more flexible than McKinney-Vento education funds, but that has to be determined. The timing and duration of funds, we know that the department is planning to get the big chunk, the ESSER's 2-3 funds out within 30 days, and then states have 60 days after that. But we don't know if that's also going to apply to the homeless piece of this, the $800 million. Also really important to note, as I mentioned, all of those set-asides that at the state and local level, you know, we read the law to say that homeless students must be served with those, but the guidance from the Department of Education will be really important on that and just how these are all coordinated. So making sure that states are coordinating, and so are districts, the homeless specific funds with the rest of the funds. All of those are things that we don't yet know and that the department will be deciding. And obviously we're still involved with the Hill, because the Hill is also very interested in how this rolls out as well. So those are some of the things that are not yet known. Next slide, please. In terms of things to do now or to think about now, so even with those pieces that aren't clear in terms of formulas and speed and uses of funds, things that we know are needs that have come up again and again and again. Tremendous concern about the challenges identifying students experiencing homelessness during the pandemic, drops in McKinney-Vento numbers when we know they should be the same or higher. So thinking about capacity and staffing for outreach and identification, navigator type positions that can really ensure that our families and youth have access to all the pieces of this package, coordinating inside the school package, the outside, everything from pandemic EBT to the health to the stimulus payments, helping families open a bank account so they can receive stimulus payments, really those sort of assistance navigator positions. Again, who might you be partnering with at the community level, thinking about those community partnerships that would be strategic. Advocating for McKinney-Vento students to have access to summer and after school programs, both from this new pot for ESSER 3, but also the previous COVID packages where the funding might not yet have been spent. Thinking a lot about the specialists on early childhood. So considering a McKinney-Vento early childhood specialist, for example, or a success coach for that transition to higher education. So these are just some of the ideas, and there's a link at the bottom of the slide, a tip sheet that we had done for the previous COVID package about ideas for using those funds for your McKinney-Vento students. And with that, I am going to turn now to Alleanne to talk a little bit about some of the funding for higher education.
Thank you, Barbara. So in this COVID relief package, there was included close to $40 billion. I believe it's about $36 billion in total for the Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund. And within this funding, half of it is supposed to go directly to emergency financial aid for students for the purpose of preventing hunger, homelessness, and hardship that was caused by the pandemic. And we do have a link here for estimated allocations for institutions of higher education, and it does account for both public institutions and private institutions as well. So then we want to kind of just go into some best practices for reaching homeless students during this time, and especially getting them to maximize their access to the funds. So one thing is, of course, if you are a person who is somewhat engaged in the higher education space, conducting outreach to all students, but definitely conducting targeted outreach to students experiencing homelessness. And one of the ways that we found, especially during the pandemic, to be most effective is the utilization of sending mass text messages that a lot of universities tend to use in cases of crisis or emergencies, in addition to emails, because this is a time when students have been bombarded by a lot of emails, and this is definitely information that we would not want them to miss. So just sending the text messages to ensure that they know that these funds are available to them so that they can apply for them. If there is an application. Another thing is prioritizing these students to receive funds and ensuring that they receive the maximum amount. And this can be done just through advocacy at your institution for them to ensure that these students are prioritized. And as I mentioned, if there is an application form, to make sure that these forms are simplified and not overly burdensome and cumbersome for these students. And lastly, just ensuring that there is a speedy rollout for the funds to these students, because they need the help now. And one thing that I do want to highlight to you all is right here at the bottom of the screen, we do have an SHC resource on back to school. It's a toolkit for back to school, like going to college during the pandemic, because of course, I'm sure we can all agree that starting college or going to college during the pandemic comes with its own set of specific challenges. So definitely want to extend that to you all and encourage you to share this resource as well if you have anyone who you feel like this may be relevant to. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Darla.
Thank you so much. We also got some exciting wins that we've been working on for a while. In particular, the extension of the Earned Income Tax Credit to unaccompanied homeless and foster youth, so at the age of 18. So this allows homeless and foster youth to claim the Earned Income Tax Credit when they file their taxes, even if they are full-time students and working. Currently, or previously, we should say, law prohibited full-time students from claiming EITC, but now there is an exception for unaccompanied homeless and foster youth. Also, there's child tax credits temporarily expanded up to $3,600 per child under 6 years old and $3,000 per child 6 and 17 years old. The IRS is going to be paying this monthly in installments of $250 or $300 from July through December. Next slide, please. Also tax-related is stimulus payments. So there is another round of direct stimulus checks, $1,400 for individuals, making up to $75,000 a year, $2,800 for joint filers, making up to $150,000 a year, plus also $1,400 per dependent child under the age of 17. We do know there's challenges for young people in filing taxes, accessing stimulus payments, especially if they've been claimed on their parents' tax returns. So we did, with Schoolhouse Connection, we did create a tax sheet, a tip sheet, so you can support young people in trying to access these funds and filing their taxes. And our partners at Baker McKenzie, the next slide, please. They actually put together a 2-page tax resources document on just different resources that service providers can help young people get connected to get support in filing their taxes. So there's taxpayer advocate services. It's an independent office that the IRS that helps taxpayers navigate and address unresolved tax issues, including trying to access economic impact payments. There's also low-income taxpayer clinics throughout the U.S. There's actually a link on the left where you can find your local EITC, and I think it could be a good resource to connect young people to get help in filing their taxes. There's also volunteer income tax assistance programs throughout. And the next slide, please. And there is identity protection with a PIN and an IRS whistleblower program. So the link there will take you to Schoolhouse Connection's website where you can download these resources and the tip sheet. And hopefully it'll help you connect young people and get connected to resources that can help young people access these tax benefits and economic stimulus payments. And now I'm going to pass it back to Alleanne.
And I'm going to insert myself right here. One last piece, because I'm seeing some questions come in, Darla, that you probably can't see with respect to the stimulus, which is just to say that the resources that Darla pointed to should be helpful in accessing unaccompanied youth to access the stimulus payments, but also to say that members of Congress are also working with the administration at Treasury to see if we can set up some sort of system for them to be able to go back. We know that many young people struggle because of parents claiming them. So there too, we still have congressional oversight and hope that the Treasury under the new administration will set up a process for unaccompanied homeless youth, and hope to be able to do a specific webinar just on this topic with the National Network for Youth and Baker McKenzie soon. That's it.
Okay. Oh, whoops. I'm so sorry. I'm not sure what just happened. I'm so sorry, everyone. I'm not sure what just happened.
There we go. You see it now.
Okay. Oh no, why is it doing this? Please excuse the technical difficulties. Okay, great. Okay, so going into the early childhood section of the bill, there was $15 billion allocated for the Child Care Development Block Grant, and also an additional $24 billion to go directly to child care providers. Included in the bill was also a $1 billion allocation for the Head Start program and another $1 billion for home visiting programs. And definitely just want to remind everyone that children experiencing homelessness are required under federal law to be prioritized for both slots in the Head Start program and also for federally funded childcare. And we also wanted to share with you all some resources that SHC has put together for the early childhood space, including ways to protect infants, toddlers, and preschoolers during COVID-19, like especially like as you know more children are at home during this time. And we also encourage everyone to find partners in your community in the early childhood space and begin discussions now of how these funds are going to be used to help our infants and toddlers. So we have some links here for finding Head Start programs near you and early Head Start, childcare programs, childcare administrators, home care visiting programs, and state pre-K programs as well. So for food and nutrition support, in the bill, it extends the pandemic electronic benefit transfer program to school age and younger children for the summer and throughout the end of the COVID-19 pandemic. We do have a resource here as well, like another link for how to help homeless and foster children and youth access pandemic EBT. And the bill also extends eligibility for the Healthy Child and Adult Care Food Program meals at homeless and youth serving shelters to young adults and youth up to 24 years old. It also extends the 15% boost to SNAP benefits through to September 30th of this year. And to kind of get into the section on housing and homelessness assistance provided through HUD, so there was a $5 billion allocation for homelessness assistance included in the bill. And this allocation is going to be provided through the Home Investment Partnerships Program, which is new. I know most persons might be used to homeless assistance funds typically going through the Emergency Solutions Grant or ESG and COCs, but what we know so far is that the reason for switching the program administrator to the Home Investment Partnership Program is because funds through ESG so far with previous COVID relief packages have been going out incredibly slowly, and only a very small percentage has actually been expended since the first set of funds were allocated through the CARES Act. So this way is just it's an alternative to ensure that funds go out as quickly as possible to alleviate all the challenges that have arisen since the pandemic. And so the persons who will be eligible for the homelessness assistance includes HUD's definition of homelessness, HUD's definition of at-risk of homelessness, which typically includes McKinney-Vento families. So those are persons who are doubled up or staying in motels or hotels, persons fleeing or attempting to flee situations of domestic abuse or trafficking, and persons who supportive services would basically prevent the family's homelessness or having a high risk of housing instability, which will be determined by the Secretary of HUD. Some of the allowable uses for these funds are tenant-based rental assistance, affordable housing development, supportive housing services, and also a new use, or a use that's not typically included in homelessness assistance, is the acquisition and rehabilitation or development of non-congregate shelters, which may be used as shelters, may be renovated and used as shelters, or converted into permanent affordable housing. And with that, I will turn it over to Darla to speak about emergency housing choice vouchers.
Great, thank you so much. So also included in the law is $5 billion for emergency housing choice vouchers. So the folks who are eligible, very similar to the last bucket, so those who meet HUD's definition of homelessness, as well as HUD's definition of at-risk of homelessness. In addition, persons fleeing or attempting to flee situations of domestic abuse, trafficking, or stalking, as well as populations for whom supportive services would prevent the family's homelessness or having a high risk of housing instability. The different uses for the housing choice vouchers include rental payments, rental arrears, utility costs, utility arrears, and housing stability services. And the next bucket we're going to talk about, next slide, is $21.5 billion in emergency rental assistance. And again, the eligible population is basically the same as the last, those meeting HUD's definition of homelessness, HUD's definition of at-risk of homelessness, persons fleeing or attempting to flee situations of domestic abuse, trafficking, or stalking, as well as populations for whom supportive services would prevent the family's homelessness or having a high risk of housing instability. And now I'm going to turn it over to Barbara. Next slide, please.
Just like with the education piece, there are items and key questions that are determined by federal agencies that weren't actually into the statute. So here are some of the questions, things that we don't yet know that the Department of Housing and Urban Development will be determining. And some of them are actually things that the Secretary will be determining. Some are actually local decisions. So I should say what's yet to be determined both at the federal level and also at the local level. So again, typically home funding would go through the funding in the community that receives home funds. It's a question here about what that's going to look like, how HUD will direct the funds, if it'll issue priority for it to go through the homeless system or through whoever administers the home program. Sometimes that might be the same agency, but that's one question. And for us, there are two sort of bigger categories of question. One is, if you just read the statute, it looks just like what Alleanne and Darla mentioned. It lists who's eligible, and it lists HUD's definition and then the other definitions equally. But we don't know yet if HUD will stick to what's in the statute in terms of what's considered to be at risk. If you read the statute, the definition of at risk includes the full McKinney-Vento definition. Or will HUD impose more requirements and documentations and hoops to jump through for that particular population? So we're concerned about that. Also, given that the HUD COC system doesn't typically work with the quote unquote at-risk families and youth, how are they going to access vouchers and other assistance? What's going to be the process for that? It would be great if we could have liaisons and RHYA and other providers be able to help families who are meet HUD's definition of at risk access these resources and not have the fact that a system has historically not served them be a barrier to them getting, again, vouchers and other assistance. And similarly with the prioritization. Again, you read the statute, there's no prioritization. So the question about whether HUD will insist on the same prioritization for regular HUD homeless funds as it is with these particular funds. Other set of questions has to do with supportive services. Again, you read the statute, it says Homeless Assistance and Supportive Services Program, but HUD in the past number of years has not been providing services. In fact, it's been doing just the opposite. So will there be a cap on the amount of supportive services? There was in the previous bills actually a cap in the statute for supportive services. That wasn't true here. So what will HUD do with that? Also, the law says supportive services for a person who's not already receiving services. So what does that mean? What does it mean for a family or youth to already be receiving services? So here's where, again, as advocacy organizations, we want to be weighing in with HUD and letting them know not just the concerns, but rather, what do we think this really should look like? What makes the most sense? And would really love to hear from you, whether it's in the chat box or the questions pane, or whether it's an email you send to us later, sort of questions and that we didn't raise here, concerns about implementation that we didn't raise here, or maybe adding on to say, yes, those are my same concerns. And also, what should this look like? Ideally in your community, what should the rollout of the HUD homeless assistance and the emergency vouchers and rent relief, what would be the most expeditious and equitable way to make sure that our families and our youth have access to these funds too? So just to put that out there in terms of an area where we love your feedback, because along with the national network and other national partners, we'll be in touch with HUD and writing a letter with our recommendations for this particular rollout. Darla, you're up next.
Great. So the other, next slide, the other pot of money we just wanted to make sure you're all aware of is there is $20 billion for the Youth Suicide Prevention Program, which is administered through SAMHSA, or the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Obviously, it's too early for them to have anything out now, but we do recommend that you sign up for grant award opportunity emails from SAMHSA. So we included a hyperlink in the slide deck there. So if you are interested in accessing these dollars, you can get notices. Also, you can bookmark SAMHSA's grant page and check that frequently. And then youth.gov does have additional information on youth suicide prevention. We do know that, national crises and after a national crisis ends, there is often an increase in suicides among young people. So we're really hoping folks will take advantage of these resources, whether you get money or not, to try to implement some youth suicide prevention programs. And now I think we're opening it up for questions and comments, right?
Yep, we have some additional resources, and there's some pieces here too. One question, could you please reiterate your points about possible HUD limitations on supportive services? I think you mentioned there being limits in the other statute, but not in this one. And so if I recall correctly, there was something like only, for the ESG homeless funds, it was something like only 10% could be used on supportive services. So there was, whether it was in the statute or in HUD's regs, I'm pretty sure it was in the statute, it was a limitation. But for this particular pot of money, it doesn't say X% for supportive services, X% for affordable housing development, X%. It just lists them all as eligible activities. So, you know, that will be something we'll just be watching to see, does HUD on its own, in other words, not because Congress told them to, go ahead and put some parameters around that. Let's see, I'm looking also. One comment here, CSBG, CARES, and ESG funds have supported significant increase in street outreach and shelter, especially for minors in our area. I'm concerned about funds going out through home will impact that. So again, I think the question here is, you know, which is the agency that will be distributing the funds? In some ways, it's a new program. It's elements of the home program, elements of the traditional ESG program. So I think the way I've heard other people describe it, in some ways it's sort of being able, because of the desire to use the funds for housing development, they went through home program, as well as the reasons Alleanne mentioned in terms of the challenges with ESG. So these are really important points to raise in terms of minors who typically have tremendous barriers to accessing any sort of resources through the HUD system. Looking to see. Darla, do you know with the youth suicide prevention what the ages will be?
That's a good question. No, I do think it is up to 24. I think I put the details in our summary of what exactly the bill says. My understanding is that it is an existing program at SAMHSA that I think they encourage collaborative applications, whether community or statewide. And so I think there's more detail in our summary, but I can do some more research and we can try to get you more information about that.
Yeah, there's definitely some questions here that we don't know the answers to, but we will go back and find out for you. Again, there's a question about how much each state will get on how the funds are determined. For the education K-12 system, we definitely, we don't know, but we suspect it'll look like Title I Part A. So if you look at what your state got for McKinney-Vento EHCY in the most recent year and you multiply it by 8, that would likely be what your state's going to get, because for the K-12 funds, that was 8 times the typical allocation. I don't know if I've seen any state estimates for the other funding streams. Alleanne or Darla, have you seen any state breakdowns? Because those funds I don't think go out directly to states. They go out to, you know, different entities that aren't states.
No, I haven't seen any as yet.
I haven't seen anything, nope.
And here's a comment, and I think this is really important too, which is need more transparency to school districts to help at-risk, quote unquote at-risk, meaning McKinney-Vento, but not HUD eligible, not HUD homeless rather, families access vouchers and other housing assistance. School districts usually lack access to obtaining vouchers in their community or helping families obtain those funds. So that's definitely something we've heard before. Looking to see. If HUD applications, along with some technical assistance on how the process works, could be made directly available to McKinney-Vento liaisons, it would be very helpful. So thank you very much and noted, and we will work together with our partners here, including with our partners at the National Center for Homeless Ed, to pull together on that particular piece. Let's see. There's other questions. I'm going to scroll through questions, and maybe Darla, if you could, and Alleanne could go on with the next slides, and I'll see if I can pull some other ones that either we know the answers to or we can point people to if we don't know.
No worries. So just to kind of go through really quickly what comes next for Congress, like what are they going to be working on next? Well, we are expecting to get soon an infrastructure package or the Build Back Better plan, which is basically the president's plan for long-term sustainable job and economic recovery after the pandemic. So we are expecting that to come soon. We're also looking forward to fiscal year 2022 appropriations conversations, which are going to be beginning shortly. And that's a good segue into an upcoming action alert that I want everyone to look towards. So we will have, we are expecting a Dear Colleague letter to be circulated soon on EHCY and RHYA, and that's Education for Homeless Children and Youth Program and the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act appropriations. So what a Dear Colleague letter is basically a letter or a request from our congressional champions for these two issue areas to other members of Congress, asking them to sign on to a letter to show support for increased funding for fiscal year 2022. And the more signatures that a letter has tend to signal more support to House leadership, which means that it's more likely that we'll see those increases. So the letter goes to the chair and ranking members of the appropriations committees, and we are going to be sending out an action alert once this begins to be circulated to persons who are signed up for our newsletter. And just a quick ad, if you aren't signed up for our newsletter, you should definitely sign up for our newsletter, because we put all the good stuff in there. So if you love good stuff, sign up for the newsletter. But we will be asking persons to reach out to their members of Congress to just ask for their support and to sign on to this letter. So stay tuned for that. And with that, I will pass it to Darla.
Hi, thanks everyone. So we are hosting our 8th annual National Summit on Youth Homelessness fully virtual next week on March 24th and 25th. We do have 4 different tracks at our summit. And of course, our education practice track is being co-led by Schoolhouse Connection. You all can still register. We included the link for you all to register. It's a conference you can attend in your slippers from the comfort of your home. No pressure to turn on your camera unless you want to share your bright shining face. We do have Senator Sinema doing a keynote, Congressman John Yarmouth, our National Youth Advisory Council of formerly homeless young people is going to be opening up the event. And we also have a federal agency roundtable discussion, which will include 6 different federal agencies, including the U.S. Department of Education, Health and Human Services, the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness, Department of Labor, Department of Justice, and HUD. So if you're interested, please register. And next slide, please. As part of our summit, we do have a virtual Hill Day. So folks can advocate and educate to their members of Congress, again, from the comfort of your home or office. We did put together a virtual advocacy toolkit because we've been getting a lot of questions from people. How do I meet with my elected officials, educate them about the issues of children and youth experiencing homelessness in my community? What's different? How does it work? I'm used to an in-person meeting, either in my state or in DC. So you can download the resource. We also did a short video that just walks you through how to schedule your meetings, how to prepare. There's draft emails, draft agenda, all the things. And we have all of our fact sheets for our virtual Hill Day. On our event page, we have a Hill Day page that you can access there. And I think I'm turning it back over to you guys, back over to Schoolhouse Connection.
I've just been buzzing through the chat box, the questions and answers, and trying to paste as many as I can here. I'll answer some of the ones I'll go from like we know the answer to like we think we know the answer to we don't know the answer. And there was a question specifically about will private schools be able to access funds? There was a whole separate reservation for private schools that was not specific to homeless or any other population, but in excess of $2 billion specifically for private schools in the COVID relief. So it wouldn't be coming from the homeless dollars, nor would it be coming from I'm just calling it ESSERS 3, which is elementary and secondary relief, some comment, elementary and secondary emergency relief funds. So it would not be coming from those, but it was a separate pot for private schools. So The short answer is yes, there's funding for private schools within this. There's a question, so just to confirm, the $800 million will go to the state and then to LEAs. Will there be specific language to LEAs, local educational agencies, that this money is specifically targeted for homeless students? I get worried so much of the ESSER funds did not benefit. Yes, that is the big win here in all of this, is it took 3 big ESSER packages, but finally, that is why we had this amendment, because we knew ESSER's dollars in the previous COVID packages were not reaching homeless students. The $800 million is specifically for students experiencing homelessness. So that's a yes. A question, will the funds go to the state boards of education or the school districts directly? The funds will flow through the state Department of Education, state education agency, and from there to school districts and or school district partnerships with community organizations. A lot of questions about how long school districts will have to spend the funds. This is not entirely clear, but certainly at least through the 23-24 school year, possibly longer than that. So we're hearing possibly longer than that, but it minimally through the 23-24 school year. Another question about or suggestion to make the information available in Spanish, which is an excellent suggestion and something we have. But we actually have a Spanish language part of our website, and we'll continue to build that out. A question: how do we ask for more EHCY money when they just gave $800 million? And that one is we just do, because it's different. This is specifically emergency relief. And we know that these programs have not been prioritized for a long time. They were only reaching 23% of school districts to begin with. And I think one of the things that we say is that this is at last, an acknowledgement of the needs of this vulnerable population, and we want to build on it, and we don't want to have the kind of funding cliff that prevents these sorts of funds from really transforming systems. And we want to leverage them, and the way you leverage them is to increase the investment. So even if it's not $800 million for fiscal year 22, it's significantly higher than the $100 million that Congress provided for fiscal year 21. So the short answer is I think we use this investment to argue for higher investments in the future. I'm going pretty quickly. I don't know, Alleanne, if you saw a question in there, or Darla, I know you can't see the questions pane to try to answer right away.
There's one question. I don't think we've went through it already, and I'm not sure if either of you guys have the answer for this. But someone's asking if there's any recommendation to encourage landlords to accept emergency housing choice vouchers once provided to youth, because in New York City there are discriminatory practices. So even if a young person has a voucher, there are lots of apartments that won't accept them.
That's a concern that we've heard from a lot of people, that vouchers in and of themselves don't necessarily solve the problem if you don't have landlords who are willing to take the vouchers, or if they're afraid of eviction moratoria being extended. So there's got to be work, and I believe that there's funds in one of the other housing pieces specifically for engaging landlords about this. None of this is a silver bullet, and that is a problem that existed before and continues to exist now. Again, if you have to turn a voucher in, it's not really helpful. And Darla, I can hear you inhaling, so you're exhaling. You're about to say something.
Sorry. No, I was just going to say, this is why we advocate for HUD funds to be able to be used to pay for service dollars, because it takes, case managers or workers, in youth and family homelessness providers to build those relationships with landlords, and maybe they have an agreement with landlords. So there's work that providers need to do to help make the vouchers work for young people. And so that's why I think one of our recommendations that we've been really discussing internally and with our partners is the need for those supportive services dollars, so that the vouchers can actually be used by those who need them.
Thanks. And a couple of things that I was able to copy in real quick here. Does the relief package differentiate if the school is a charter? No, it doesn't. So charter schools are, it's local educational agency. So it does not differentiate. So charter schools would be eligible just like any other local educational agency. A question about a county office of education. if they will benefit, again, county offices of education, our local educational agencies. A lot of this is going to depend on whether we would think that there would be something like ARA. In 2009, there was a similar scenario with the stimulus bill, and McKinney-Vento got $70 million on top of the existing funds, and that went out from states to school districts based on the previous identified numbers of students experiencing homelessness. So what we don't know now is if the Department of Education will instruct states to do something similar, sort of a formula, or whether they will split it and say part of it needs to be a competition, for example, from statewide funds for partnerships. Or one thing that we're concerned about is a competition right now, given how taxed school districts and state departments to do a competition for this amount of funds would slow things down and could be cumbersome. So those are the sorts of things that the Department of Education will decide, and that we are, of course, obviously in conversation and talking about the different options, and from stakeholders too, about what is the best way to get the money where it needs to be quickly and used well. Another question, which is, let's see, when talking points to elevate the importance for state education agencies and local education agencies, that they need to continue to support students experiencing homelessness in other areas where the Act references homeless students. So, for example, I mentioned at the beginning that there is a learning loss 5% set aside at the state, and summer schools and after schools. At the local level, a 20% reservation. Part of what we're saying, and I agree, because the comment is, excited about the 800 million, but would love help in making the case that this funding doesn't absolve states and school districts of serving students experiencing homelessness in the other areas. So our read of all of those reservations where homelessness is mentioned is that it's a requirement. It doesn't say may, it says use funds for these purposes. So that's our starting piece, is that they actually have to. And we're also saying that the best way to leverage the 800 million is to make sure that students who are homeless have access to all the other pieces that schools are getting. So if we can address learning loss, for example, for students experiencing homelessness from the larger pots of funds, that means more of the $800 million for homeless students can be used for identification, for outreach, for wraparound services, for all the things to stabilize the young person or family so that they can participate in education and just have stability in their lives. So those are some of the talking points, and certainly would love to hear more. Darla, you again, or somebody else inhaled him. I don't know if it was.
Wasn't me that time.
Okay. Another comment, I know Patty Murray had a housing act a few years ago. It might be a good place to start looking. Yes, the Senator Murray had a housing school demonstration program act called the HEAD Act, which would fund school housing partnerships. So that also is a place too where we 100% agree that school housing partnerships can be really beneficial and would be a great use of this funds to get thinking about that. See, a question about if funds could be used for utility and rent. What about internet service for educational needs? So one of the things that we didn't put in this is a really top line, high level summary of the bill, was there was actually over $7 billion in the legislation for what's called the E-rate program, which is not a program that we've worked with tremendously, but is specifically for connectivity and internet. So, these funds shouldn't be used. Ideally, they're not used for other parts of the bill. So, we don't want the school money to go for internet if there's $7 billion elsewhere for internet specifically. So a lot of this is, and that's kind of what we mentioned in the beginning, is really kind of the patchwork of this legislation, so that we're being very strategic in how the homeless specific monies are used and how we're leveraging those monies to make sure families and young people have everything else that they need, whether it's housing, food, internet, health, etc.
I do want to bring up one comment that I saw about foster youth who are in college or maybe working, who have their own children who may not be who may not be able to get their tax credits because they may, or their stimulus funds because they may have been claimed by a foster parent, and just kind of the concern that foster care moving forward should do a better job in helping youth who are working and filing taxes.
Yes. So, and then there's a comment, obviously our district receives E-rate, a rural area, and internet isn't always reliable anyway. So bets it, you know, the macro concerns and the inequities prior to COVID still exist, and I don't think anybody thinks this bill solves all the problems, but hopefully it sets us on a path of meeting some immediate needs and setting systems in place to begin to solve some of the longer term problems too. So let's see what else here. Question, where is the accountability to ensure that the funds are being used appropriately? This would be for districts where the homeless liaison is not typically involved in ensuring that they receive the money for displaced students. So the state education agency will have oversight over the funds. We don't know what the reporting requirements will be yet. We certainly heard loud and clear from state and local education agencies that those reporting requirements need to be made explicit up front. But in terms of accountability, it's the state level of oversight there. Looking to scroll through to see if there's other pieces here. Again, Alleanne or Darla, if there's anything else that you're seeing or wanting to add while I'm scrolling through and finding questions that I can easily answer.
I would just say we're definitely very aware of the unaccompanied homeless youth tax challenges, but that really, what we've been hearing, and Barbara, correct me if I'm wrong, young people really do need to file their taxes to access these benefits, and they are going to need support to do it. And so there are different, clinics like it mentioned in the Baker McKenzie resource that we shared. We also did, the tip sheets on accessing stimulus payments. But I think ultimately the issue of, a parent claiming a young person on their taxes and then a young person trying to claim the same benefit, what we've been hearing in our meetings, which Barbara alluded to, advocating with Congress and the Treasury, which is ongoing, is, the IRS to date has not been willing to give the same benefit to two different people. So I think ultimately, young people have to decide, or young people are put in the uncomfortable position of potentially saying, hey, my parent or legal guardian or caregiver fraudulently, claimed me. And I think that's where it gets messy. We've been pushing for that to not have to be the case. Obviously, this isn't probably the best mechanism to get cash to young people experiencing homelessness, but it's what we've got. So we are continuing to work with our partners at Baker McKenzie and advocating through Congress. So I think you can expect more resources from us. But I think at a base level, if you all could be thinking about resources and access to tax filing support for young people, I think thinking through that, locating places that will help them, in your community is an important first step that you can take now. I don't know if you have anything that you would add, Barbara.
Nope, I think that's great. Just a couple other pieces, and a lot of questions about when the money is available and the different pieces of the package roll out on different timelines. For the big pot, the 120 billion K-12, that I think I read today the Department of Ed wants to get that out in 30 days, and then states have to get that out with 60 days after they receive it. The homeless specific 800 million isn't necessarily part of that. We of course want it to be coordinated, so it's not seen as like here's what you do for homeless students and here's $120 billion for everybody else. So that, but at least that timing in terms of money being available, that part for ESSERS 3 actually is in the statute. And a question: how can liaisons provide continued support to homeless youth if the liaison only works for 9 months? We know that homelessness doesn't end of the school year. That is absolutely true, and that is part of the reason for getting the funds out soon, so that districts can staff up specifically for the summer, and the massive re-engagement and outreach that we know has to happen, particularly after many students have been so disengaged for so long. And there are questions, a number of questions around the extent to which undocumented youth and families have access to some of these funds that I don't know the answer to and don't want to give the wrong answer to. So we will do as we do with all of our webinars, which is the questions that we're not answering now. We'll follow up not just to the individual sender, but with a document that when we post or after we post the archive. Question, here's one that I think I do know the answer to. Can the money be spent on staff? And I'm assuming that this is the K-12 education money, and also whether it's the homeless K-12 or the other. And the answer there, I think, is very definitely yes. That's come up a lot in conversations, and I know something that's come up even with the Hill as we talk about what needs to be done when in terms of staffing up for the various pieces here. Yes, a question, will there be a frequently asked questions based on these questions? Yes, absolutely. It sometimes takes us a week or two, particularly if there's ones where we need to research the answers. But yes, just as we did with the FERPA webinar and others, we'll follow up to make sure that we can respond to questions here. And I think I'm going to pause there and see if we have anything else in the last 5 minutes here. If I'm not answering a question, it's either because I don't know the answer and I don't want to give the wrong answer. Because there's some questions about E-rate too that I'm not 100% certain of.
In the meanwhile, I can just do a quick ad while you take a look, Barbara, for something that we have that will go perfectly hand in hand with the National Network for Youth Virtual Advocacy Toolkit. Schoolhouse Connection has been hosting a step-by-step advocacy training series for educators and service providers. Our 6th and final installment is actually next week, Tuesday, but here in the presentation, we have hyperlinks to the archived webinars. So in the first part, we covered getting grounded and just advocacy in the new Congress, including like the dynamics of the 117th Congress, the importance of constituent advocacy. We also covered how to effectively communicate with Congress, and we had guests from 2 senator offices, from the offices of Senators Murkowski and Manchin, who are, of course, our champions on this issue. What does successful advocacy look like? And we heard from some peers, some educators and service providers on their own experiences with advocacy and some lessons that they've learned. We also looked at using media, both traditional forms of media and social media, how we kind of incorporate them into legislative advocacy. And then this past Tuesday, we covered how to engage parents and youth with lived experience in advocacy. And then, of course, in our final installment, we're going to be looking at how to apply these lessons closer to home. So we're going to be taking a look at state and local federal policy advocacy, state and local policy advocacy, comparing and contrasting it to federal policy advocacy, and kind of what it looks like at the state. And I want to extend that to you all. It's going to be really great. It's, like I said, it's the final installment in our 6-part series. And if you happen to miss the other installments, you can check them out on the Schoolhouse Connection website under our archived webinar section. And we hope to have you all engage in advocacy. I hope this presentation so far has shown you what advocacy can do. And yeah, we hope to see you all. And the registration link for next week, Tuesday, is also included in this, but that can also be found on Schoolhouse's website under upcoming webinars.
Great, thanks everybody.
Thank you. Have a good one.